In the name of Jesus.
Amen.
If I had been Joseph, I would have been moaning and complaining all the way to Bethlehem. Mary would have had to tell me to put a sock in it. This is so messed up. We should not even be making this trip. I told them you were 9 months pregnant and they should have given you an exemption, but no. Do you know how much this trip is costing us? And what really ticks me off is the only reason we have to go to Bethlehem is to get signed up so they know how much tax we have to pay. This is sick. But somehow it makes me feel better to think about the first Christmas this way. In some ways, the first Christmas was a bit of a train wreck. Here, your first child is being born. It's a great thing, but you're nervous and you're worried. You want everything to be perfect. You want mom there. And you end up giving birth in a barn in a strange town, just the way you'd imagined it. And it reminds me of all the Christmases that we have had that went wrong. This year you spent Christmas in a hospital, or in a field tent, or in a bare hotel room somewhere. Or Christmas was 3 months, 1 week, and 4 days after your wife left you or your brother died, but who's counting? And you spent about half the night crying. Some Christmases are like that. But what I love about the first Christmas is that it was not about accomplishing the perfect happy evening, as enjoyable as that is. The first Christmas was about how, despite everything, God still showed up, full of grace and truth. Yeah, it was too bad they had to go all the way to Bethlehem just because Caesar Augustus was trying to figure out how much money he could wring out of them. But God saw to it that this little trip ended up bringing this family right to David's city, where David's greater son could be born because he was supposed to be born there all along. God is so determined and so clever, he can find a way to master even the most unlikely and discouraging events. He knows what he's doing, and there's no keeping him out. I'm thinking of a guy who was arrested for murder, and there's no question he did it. He was kind of proud of it. And he spent Christmas in jail, which was kind of a bummer, but there it is. But it was only because he was there that he could meet another man who was not expecting to spend Christmas in jail, because normally he spent Christmas in church. He was only in jail because he made some huge mistakes and had gotten caught. But the disasters that brought these two very different men together and thoroughly spoiled their Christmases also gave the one a chance to share Christ in a meaningful way with the other at a very teachable moment, when for the first time in his life, he might have been ready to listen. I'm not saying God had it all planned out like that, but God showed up and he saw his opportunity and he jumped. God is like that. I've been to a few places where they don't let you bring in any kind of food at all because it's forbidden, it's against the rules. How do you give communion to somebody when you cannot bring in the elements? Well, you use what's there. I've used the corner of a Pop-Tart, a sip of root beer, an oyster cracker, and some prune juice. Because God is determined to get in there, and he'll use what he's got because he's going to do it. And here's another thing. If I'd been out in the fields with the sheep that night, I'd have been screaming and yelling as loudly as any one of the shepherds. It says here that when the angels showed up, they were terrified, and who wouldn't be? This is a little detail we normally skip over. But for some reason, their terror speaks to me tonight. How often has God shown up full of grace and truth in moments that really kind of felt terrifying at first, or at least upsetting? I've told some of you before about my daughter and how she felt when she found out that she was pregnant for the first time. It definitely was not planned. In fact, all the planning had been around not getting pregnant. But it happened anyway. And talk about terror. I'm going to have a baby. I'm not ready. She cried for 2 weeks. And then she decided that if this is God's sense of humor, she might as well laugh and go along with the joke. And every year I keep nominating her for Mother of the Year because she's amazing and she loves it, and now they have 3 kids. The point is not that unplanned pregnancies are always wonderful, but the point is that when God blesses us, sometimes our first response is sheer terror. I've talked with people who have been set free from kidnapping or from cruel, abusive situations and domestic violence, but their first reaction to freedom was terror. The fear of the unknown. They didn't know what to do now. I've met people whose faith has grown wonderfully, but only after that terrifying feeling that they were losing their faith. I've met people whom God has led to strength and power and purpose, but only by bringing them into situations where they felt so confused and terrified. The tidings of comfort and joy came after tidings of panic and confusion. And finally, one last thought. You've been looking for God to do something about some things that are really annoying you. Anything, Lord, but just do it. And I'm not trying to push you now, Lord, but the sooner the better. And you've even offered a few helpful suggestions in case God needs to get his creativity stirred up a little bit. And then his answer comes. You're going to have a baby. Oh, great. What are you telling me? Are you telling me that really nothing much is going to happen for a long time until this baby gets a lot older? How long am I going to have to wait? Will I even be around to see it? And in the meanwhile, I thought I was getting a solution to a problem, but here's more work to do raising this kid. Is this seriously your answer to prayer? More work? But the birth of Christ shows us how God responds to some of our predicaments. He does it by creating community. We're not going to solve a whole lot of things by being lone wolves. God's help comes to us as community is formed and as we are drawn into this community. The community begins with a husband, a wife, and a child, and then God adds a few shepherds, and later on, God pulls in 12 disciples, and they become 70 disciples. And the community keeps growing because this is how God works. Most often is by creating a community. And there are no perfect communities, just as there are no perfect families, but still we need them. And that is why I remain so dedicated to the visible church throughout the world. Yes, I know we have our critics. Many people are complaining about organized religion and institutional religion. And when they say organized religion, I think they're giving me too much credit sometimes. And they say it's cold and old and farty and hypocritical and out of touch and all the rest. We've heard it all. But I remain dedicated to the visible assembly of believers. Because God does. And because it's a wonderful thing. He has to make community out of what's available, and of course that means flawed human beings. But here is where we learn to confess our sins and then to forgive each other. Here is where we grind the rough edges off each other, where we learn from each other, where we struggle to cooperate. Where people who might argue in other places come here and say, Jesus has brought us together. I'm so glad that this is a place where there is some peace. And even if we do argue, we try to do it for the glory of God and not selfishly. Community is where God teaches us what real love is, not the hallmark form of love with pretty people and happy endings in an hour and a half with 8,000 commercials, but real love, where we hold on to each other for dear life, even when we're not happy with each other, the way God does. Or where we don't know what the next right thing to do is, but we're not going to give up on each other because God never does. Where we get up at 3 in the morning even though we're dead tired because the baby needs feeding, and where somebody picks us up when we fall, and we pick somebody up when they fall. Where the long, slow work of love changes us. So when God comes among us, He doesn't bring a result or an outcome or a product or even a happy mood. He gives us Himself. All of Himself He gives to us, which is all we really need. And He gives Himself to us through one another. Thanks be to God.